Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vermont Law and Graduate School's 2024 Hot Topics in Environmental Law Summer Lecture Series. I'm Christoph Korshane. I'm the Interim Director of the Environmental Law Center, Director of the Environmental Advocacy Clinic, and an Associate Professor of Law here at Vermont Law and Graduate School. We're very pleased to welcome you to the presentation today. Each talk is worth one Vermont CLE credit. So please keep track of the talks that you attend for your records. We will have time after today's presentation, as we typically do, for Q&A. So for those of you who are watching live on VLGS YouTube, you can enter questions in the chat space on the right-hand side at any time. And you don't need to hold your questions till the end. You can put them there as the presentation is proceeding. After the presentation, we'll see if we can get through as many questions as possible. We'll wrap up shortly before 1 p.m. Today, we're very pleased to welcome Giovanna Taylor. Giovanna is an editor for Bloomberg Law's Environment and Energy section. Since joining the newsroom, she has edited hundreds of stories on a range of environmental law topics, such as what's considered WOTUS, or Waters of the United States, after the Supreme Court's ruling in Sackett versus CPA, and kids in Montana, Hawaii, and California kickstarting trending lawsuits against the government for infringing on their rights to a safe environment with climate change-inducing policies. Born and raised in Chicago, Giovanna now resides in the Washington metro area. Giovanna joins us at VLGS as one of our distinguished summer environmental media fellows. We've had a wonderful time with Giovanna over the last couple of weeks. Today, she will present how did the U.S. legal framework allow and/or provoke disproportionate placement of polluting projects, and continues to do that in minority, low-income communities. Please join me in welcoming Giovanna Taylor to our series.
Hi. Thank you, Christoph, for that gracious introduction. I'm going to share my screen now and get started. Oh, I didn't mean to. I need to go back. 1 second, guys. Bear with me. Alrighty. Just 1 second, you all. Sorry. I had my outline. Well, yes, as you guys can see, I tried to rework the title just a bit, but it's still very long. And the message remains the same as Christoph mentioned. I'm presenting on how the disproportionate placement of polluting projects in minority and low-income communities is legal despite overwhelming implications of racial discrimination. Also, as mentioned, I'm a content editor at Bloomberg Law's Environment and Energy section, and have been for over a year. So I just want to start off with the goal and the mission of this presentation, which is to spark conversations and ideas for action, as opposed to being like a law class, which I now have the experience of, now being a media fellow with Vermont Law Schools. And it has been a remarkable experience. I just want to take a moment to say that and let everyone know that, yeah, it's definitely going to be something that I cherish, and my career in media, and also as a person, awaken to the stark reality of environmental injustices and inequalities. I will stray away from most legal jargon. I am not focusing too much on court cases. I appreciate audience participation over all things in this presentation, so please keep the chats coming in. And I would love for you all to add any additional context because, yeah, I just value this as a learning experience. I also want you all to interact within the presentation. So there'll be just a couple of references to use your own computers to do your own research within this presentation. So have a couple tabs handy. Although the topic can be a bit depressing, I strive for us as community members and professionals in the legal field to stay optimistic for the future of how we can address these inequities. Also, I tend to focus a lot on racial discriminatory aspects of fence line communities, but please keep in mind that wealth and class is a huge part of this conversation as well. So yeah, that's just a brief start. Let's get into the presentation. So yes, I wanted to start off with something a bit personal to me. As you can see on the screen, I have asthma. I just found out I have asthma this year, actually. And I am originally from Chicago, born and raised on the west and south sides of Chicago, which is known to have a lot of pollution based off of some information that I'll provide to you all later in the presentation. So I've always grown up in the areas that are known to be heavily polluted in the Chicago area. And now learning that other areas of the city aren't hit as hard as the areas that I've grown up in, it feels like overwhelming a bit for me emotionally. Also, it feels like this diagnosis of having asthma as an older adult, well, as an adult, feels like it was inevitable because of the places I've been and the pollution that I might have encountered throughout my life. But yeah, so I just wanted to start that off before we kickstart into more contextual things. So, yes, I will note a couple of current examples of disproportionate placements of polluting projects in the communities that I'm focusing on, which is minority and low income. Though there's too many to count, and I'll get into how you as an audience can fact check that in a little bit. But let's start with a video from a colleague of mine. Her name is Jennifer Ajavi. She is the air and climate reporter at Bloomberg. And yeah, this will be quite informative for you all. So give me 1 second as I share my screen.
In the fall of 2020, a group of citizens from Chicago's southeast side.
I want to restart the video just in case you guys didn't see quite the beginning.
In the fall of 2020, a group of citizens from Chicago's southeast side sued to stop a metal recycling plant from moving into their neighborhood.
The southeast side is earning another pollutant in their community. That's not acceptable. That is immoral and that's wrong.
The plant was known to spew metallic dust from scrap piles into the air. Furious about the relocation from a mostly white neighborhood on the north side to their majority Latino community, the residents argued the move violated their civil rights.
Because of the amount of industry that is concentrated along the Calumet River on a daily basis, you will smell foul odors. They burn your eyes. I suffer from severe asthma. On days like that, I have to go inside. This is another way that we are treated like subhuman.
But a judge denied the request. Her reason? They couldn't prove intentional discrimination was involved in the decision to move the plant. Proving intentional discrimination is a high bar that was put in place by a 2001 Supreme Court opinion authored by Antonin Scalia. But we'll get back to that. From Flint, Michigan's contaminated water supply to Cancer Alley in southern Louisiana, Communities of color and low-income communities across the country are disproportionately affected by pollution. The movement to address these disparities has a name: environmental justice.
Environmental justice will be at the center of all we do, addressing the disproportionate health and environmental and economic impacts on communities of color.
The Biden administration has pledged to make environmental justice a priority. And a few states are creating new laws that give disadvantaged communities the tools to combat negative environmental impacts. So when it comes to environmental justice, what real legal protections are there? The roots of environmental justice date back to Jim Crow. Discriminatory policies like redlining segregated millions of Americans into neighborhoods that were then targeted for landfills, incinerators, and other toxic facilities. When giving permits to heavy industry, regulators often failed to account for pre-existing pollution levels. The cumulative impact of multiple toxic facilities on a neighborhood's environment can have tragic consequences.
In 2020, the places where you find highest incidence of COVID, highest mortality of COVID, were again in largely Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. And that's no surprise. Those are some of the areas of worst air pollution.
We will not allow one county to become a dump site.
It took a wave of protests in the late 1970s and 1980s to finally force the federal government to recognize environmental justice as an issue that needed attention.
We've come to Washington, D.C. to catch the attention of the president and the government and all forces that be.
In 1992, under President George H.W. Bush, the Environmental Protection Agency created the Office of Environmental Justice. And in 1994, President Clinton signed an executive order requiring the federal government to address environmental justice in communities of color and low-income populations.
Executive Order 12898 made environmental justice the mission of every federal agency in the United States.
Cliff Villa is an environmental law professor at the University of New Mexico. Before that, he spent 2 decades at the Environmental Protection Agency, enforcing federal environmental regulations. He says that progress on environmental justice at the federal level has stalled since the 1990s.
That mission has come and gone in emphasis with various presidential administrations.
The lay of the land for a law for environmental justice is sort of hit and miss. We don't have a national U.S. environmental justice law.
As a result, communities looking to get let out of their drinking water or push back against a hazardous waste site have had to find other legal options.
There are a number of federal environmental statutes that allow advocates to pursue environmental justice. So, for example, in response to drinking water contamination in Flint, Michigan, there were citizen suits against the state for violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act.
Another option invokes civil rights laws, like the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause and the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But as the residents of Southeast Chicago learned, there is a 2001 Supreme Court precedent blocking the path for many plaintiffs arguing cases rooted in discrimination. That case, which had nothing to do with the environment, was about whether the state of Alabama was discriminating against its Spanish-speaking citizens by requiring them to take their driver's license test in English.
We hold that there is no private right of action to enforce disparate impact regulations promulgated under Section 602 of Title VI.
What the Supreme Court decided, 5-4, in a majority opinion by Justice Scalia, is that in order to bring that case in court, the plaintiffs had to prove not only did the state discriminate, but they intended to discriminate. Intent to discriminate is a very high burden to prove.
Since then, all lawsuits centered on civil rights claims, including environmental justice cases, have had an uphill battle in court. So, what options are left? A big one is Cliff Villa's old agency. Critics say the EPA doesn't have the best track record on environmental justice, but that may be changing.
Environmental activists are celebrating a decision by the Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, to delay the permitting process for General Iron.
The decision comes after the Biden administration's new EPA administrator, Michael Regan, sent a letter to Lightfoot concerned about another possible polluting business coming to an area that has been plagued with environmental hazards.
That was a huge victory for the community because we were on pins and needles. This was going to be permitted any day now. Literally, this happened at the last final hour.
The plant is on hold for now, pending further environmental review. But in the midst of a national reckoning over race, the Chicago decision may be an early salvo in the Biden administration's attempt to address environmental justice.
You're going to see them reaching out, providing grants to these communities where there's money, making sure that they're bringing these communities to the table so that they have meaningful involvement.
Still, unless Congress enacts a law, these changes may be tenuous.
One of the big concerns with President Clinton's executive order was that was more than 25 years ago. And what happened was the issue came and went, and from a results standpoint, there really has not been the kind of progress that we might have expected.
I have 2 children and I want the best for them. That is my goal in life, to be able to do something that is going to improve the quality of life of people on the Southeast side.
I'm back here, you guys. Hopefully you could.
There's a law that requires commercial fishing vessels to have federal monitors on board to make sure they.
Sorry about that. But yes, I am back. 1 second as I get my PowerPoint presentation back up and running. So yes, I hope you guys were able to take away something from that video, narrated by my beloved colleague, Jennifer Hijazi. I also included her email address in case any ideas spark to mind that you would like to see further investigated, or you have any people that she could speak to that she would benefit from knowing. So thank you guys for that attention to the video. I am going to just briefly talk about a bit of what she discussed in the video already, which was the issue going on in Chicago, which is where I'm from, of the general iron scrap metal shredding facility being moved from a white, wealthy neighborhood called Lincoln Park to a Latino majority Southeast Side neighborhood. And that area already has 250 facilities that are actively monitored for pollution. And yeah, more seem to be wanting to come into that area. But from the latest information that I researched with my colleague, it seems like the advocates in the Southeast Side community might have won their battle, and the iron scrap metal facility will not be coming to that area, which is already heavily polluted. So that's a small victory for that community. Also in that video, Jenny touches on the issue in Louisiana of Cancer Alley, also referred to as Death Alley, where it's just a strip of about 85 miles near water that petrochemical industry facilities seem to find popular to build new developments in, heavily burdening that community with health effects such as cancer, respiratory ailments, reproductive health problems, to name a few. But we'll go into that a little later. I'm going to get you all a little more involved now. So let's rewind to where I said you all could be able to fact check me on the gravity of minority low-income communities being targeted for the most heavily polluting developments in industries like hazardous waste, which is basically just commercial facilities that handle uncontrolled waste, uncontrolled toxic waste. So their whole claim to fame, how they make their money, is to take in uncontrolled toxic waste. And these type of facilities are being populated in the areas that I mentioned that are majority, minority, and low income. So here I have the URL for the EPA's in EJ Mapper, which I got the idea to do as a part of my class here at Vermont Law School with Professor Jonathan Rosenblum. So it's a tool that you can use. You can put in the URL now. And yes, so it's a interactive map. So you can, it should be on the side of your screen, either your left or your right. I'm not sure if it switches over because you guys are viewing from your own screens, but you put in a city of your choice, and the map will run data based on the demographic index of Biden's executive order. And you can also search for different types of pollution driving issues such as hazardous waste, particulate matter, and just see which communities are most affected. So here on the screen also, I have an example of my project that I did for my class with Professor Rosenblum. The area that I chose was Chicago, of course. And you can read a little bit of my bullet points for my project, but we don't have to get too much into that. But as you can see, for the demographic index used in Biden's executive order on environmental justice, the south and west sides of the city are very much so, including the low income and minority members that are targeted for benefits through the order. And then on the other side, I have the hazardous waste proximity, which is still concentrated in those same areas, though it's a lot more shaded, which I note to maybe a little bit of gentrification happening in the city, but that's just my assumption. But as you can see, the prime area of Chicago, where the Chicago word is still not as impacted as those areas on the south and west sides. So I'll give you guys a minute just to do your own research for just a second. Okay, I'm gonna move on now. All righty, so let's throw out Biden's executive order on environmental justice. For example, right now, for just a point I want to make, that there wouldn't be a need for the idea of environmental justice in the political sector if discrimination by race and income wasn't and isn't a prevalent factor. So I'm throwing that out just to make that point. And throughout the history of our country that we live in, that has been thrown out, the idea of environmental justice. So you wouldn't need to have this conversation if there wasn't some underlying issue happening. Though, as the video noted, it is hard to prove within the court of law. So here I have the slide just highlighting sections of the executive order that Biden put out a little over a year ago. And often highlighted in the order is the Justice 40 initiative, which would put 40% of all overall benefits of certain federal climate, clean energy, and affordable, sustainable housing toward the communities overburdened by pollution. And I have it highlighted here, the racial discrimination aspect, and also if you look further down, it talks about the racial aspects of the discrimination more, who is affected, like Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities. So this order gives me hope for change, although its outcome is yet to be determined in this new stage and the shifting political and judicial climate around environmental justice. So this agency action, and agency action being ever changing. So it's yet to be seen what will come from this, but it still gives me a bit of hope. Now we're gonna go back in time a little bit. We're gonna delve into a bit of the history of discriminatory zoning and planning in the US. So, and also you can, like on the screen says, you can access the executive order in your own and do a little bit more digging into what exactly is the administration asking of these industries. So, to understand the deep-rooted, yet, as my professor notes often, the facially neutral, which means basically that you just can't say it in blatant words, history of the country's laws that have provoked current and consistent placements of polluting projects in Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities, such as those around zoning specifically. We're going to look at a quote from someone considered an early expert in zoning and planning, George D. Hott. So he came about in the 1920s, and his work is often referred to by city and town developers. Well, was, and I'm assuming hopefully not, still is, but often referred to during that time of early zoning and planning laws. So this is a quote that he has said or wrote in efforts to promote segregation through zoning and planning. So just to get the effect, I'd like to read it all out for you all, though I know you all can do that on your own. The commingling of the homes and places of abode of white men and Black men gives unnecessary provocation to miscegenation, which basically is interracial relationships, race riots, lynching, and other forms of social malaise existent when a childlike, undisciplined, inferior race is living in close contact with a people of more mature civilization. So this is someone that people referred to when people of power referred to when they were creating zoning and planning throughout the country. And a lot of this, of course, is still happening because of the facially neutral provisions, though it is not said blatantly that, oh, like Hott is saying here, this mixture of Black and white people, Black and white men, is just disgusting. It's not said that blatantly, but because of this being a foundation of development of planning and zoning, yeah, it still is used within so many of our zoning and planning uses today. But yes, during the time of Hott, it was more about nuisance and controlling nuisance before it happens. So his objective was majorly about controlling nuisance. But then from there, we get into the idea of Euclidean zoning, which is an earlier actual kind of more concrete idea of like being able to use the law to promote zoning and planning by cities, towns, and municipalities. So we're going to get into this quote on the screen a little bit. I just want to explain a little bit more about Euclidean zoning. It's a system of zoning where a town or community is divided into areas for specific uses of land, which are permitted through the local government. The land uses are divided between industrial and residential uses. And they also factor in height and area which is a method derived from New York City when it passed its first comprehensive zoning law in 1916. But the nickname Euclidean zoning came about in 1926 during the Supreme Court's case, pivotal case actually for zoning and planning, Village of Euclid, Ohio versus Ambler Realty. And that's where I have the quote here. That's language actually used by the Supreme Court in that case. So in that case, the Supreme Court upheld the right of a locality to enforce a zoning system. So yes, that makes it 100% legal to do what you need to do to put certain industries in certain places. So yes, I will also read this quote. It is pointed out that the apartment house is a mere parasite constructed in order to take advantage of the open spaces and attractive surroundings created by the residential character of the district. Moreover, the coming of one apartment house is followed by others, interfering by their height and bulk with the free circulation of air and monopolizing, sorry about that, the rays of the sun, which otherwise would fall upon the smaller homes, thus depriving children of their privilege of quiet and open spaces for play enjoyed by those in more favored localities, until finally the residential character of the neighborhood and its desirability as a place of detached residences are utterly destroyed. So yes, that is what the Supreme Court wrote in their decision allowing the enforcement of a zoning system by towns, cities, and municipalities. I'm just gonna let you guys take that in. So the emphasis here is on protecting the children fortunate enough to grow up in single-family homes in the 1920s and going into the 30s and now. Not so much now. I might be over-exaggerating a little bit by going all the way into now, but we're gonna get there. Give me a second. So the focus is on the children, protecting the children in these single-family homes during this time. It's pointing out that apartments and the taller units, those people in those conditions, I guess it's just fine, okay? They're the parasite. And it's already recognized that there's health impacts within this language, but we're focusing only on these single-family home children, these single-family home owners who would be affected by the health impacts of taller structures, apartments, industry. During this time, due to more evident racist practices by local governments across the US, many Black and minority, and I just want to take a moment to highlight that during this time, minority included immigrants from places such as Ireland, Italy, and of Jewish descent, because we're still in the 1920s, 1930s here. So during this time, the more racist practices forced these groups of people were forced to live only in certain areas, often housed with other families, especially if help from the government was needed. In contrast, the Federal Housing Administration, created during the Great Depression, had single-family home initiatives that offered subsidized housing in suburban areas with specific rules or covenants not to allow Black people or other minority groups. So that's a federal agency provoking that and making it so that it's a lot more easy for a white family to get a single-family suburban home whereas these other groups, these Black and minority groups, are left to be in only certain areas to live. And yes, so that's when we get into buffer zones. So yes. Though separate from the actual issue in the Euclid case, but brought about due to the Supreme Court's language in the case. Within Euclidean zoning, during the time of its inception, we had what's called buffer zones to separate areas permitted for single-family home residential development from industrial development to offset the health impacts. Historically, buffer zones were areas where multifamily unit housings and minority and low-income homes were allowed in cities and towns and municipalities in their zoning plans. When a Black or other minority family was fortunate enough to try to purchase a single-family home, city-town comprehensive planning involving eligibility for bank loans, which is called redlining if you want to look that up, and covenants within home associations made it almost impossible to do in certain neighborhoods, leaving these single-family homeowners in buffer zones as well. And as we know, within family and within passing down property, you tend to stay where you have property, where your family is leaving this legacy. And that's across all races. So fence line communities are most impacted by pollution due to local governments, with the help of federal and the courts, masterminding their proximity to some of the most toxic industries, like the hazardous waste facilities that I mentioned earlier, which their whole industry is to take in toxic waste. Also, legal tools like eminent domain, which is government seizing land for a public use, more so for use for transportation such as highways more recently, and rezoning, which is gaining land through amortization, which is depreciating the value of the homes, can push polluting industries like hazardous waste facilities into predominantly Black and other minority communities. And though these legal methods can be used to put industry or public use developments in any neighborhood across the country, somehow the projects that omit the most toxic pollution ends up in the same type of neighborhoods in cities and towns across the country. So yes, this brings us back to today. And I have another video for you all. This one is focused on cancer/death alley in Louisiana. Give me a minute here while I get this working. We are almost getting ready for question and answer. And I just want to take a minute just to get back to our mission here of this conversation and this presentation is to start and create ideas, spark conversation. So I hope the chat is going off right now. I hope people are putting in their insight and also their opinion. If you have a very strong one, go for it. But here we are, 1 second.
Rise founder Sharon Levine lives in the historically Black community of Welcome, at the heart of an 85-mile stretch of the Mississippi River, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, known as the Petrochemical Corridor. Here, 200 industrial facilities produce some of the nation's most toxic air and highest risks of cancer. And air quality is only getting worse. Like the climate of racism, toxic air pollution is largely invisible to the eye, which enables politicians to deny its existence and deride residents' decades-long demands for justice. In the 1980s, environmental justice activists nicknamed the region Cancer Alley. Today, residents refer to their homeland as Death Alley. Each and every plant occupies the footprints of fallow sugarcane plantations. Death Alley is a continuum of environmental racism spanning 300 years. After emancipation, small towns grew from rows of plantation slave quarters. These free towns have become today's fence-line communities, sharing property lines with massive industrial facilities. This racialized spatial pattern is contiguous with Death Alley. The community of Lyons was a quiet rural free town, until the intrusion of Marathon Petroleum Company and Cargill Inc. Today, these corporations own all of Lyons, save for 5 homes. 2 historic Black cemeteries are surrounded by industry. Marathon even owns a portion of one of them. While a picture of dispossession comes into focus, surviving residents must also contend with unseen occupying forces. We asked Earthworks, an environmental action group, to employ a technique called optical gas imaging to bring invisible hydrocarbons into the visible register. We cross-referenced a photograph captured by our field technician with Marathon's permit documents. Revealing the suffocation of communities caught between the plants. When the wind blows from the southeast, the majority Black town of Reserve is smothered with high concentrations of PM 2.5. And chloroprene. But when it blows from the southwest,
growing up as a little girl, we used to smell those many different odors. So we wasn't, didn't know no better then. And sometimes we would go inside and we would complain about having a headache or a stomachache from the smells.
You can still smell it now until today.
Right.
You were a little girl, so that means it's still doing it.
You're right.
They never stopped. They're probably doing even more. Because at any time she wasn't even outside playing. She passed in her car, and it all through her car, and she could smell it.
Yeah.
I feel like we're dying one at a time. And just like I said,
numbers.
When we breathe, we feel like we're being wiped out.
My trees are turning black. I had to cut them down. We can't even make garden here because everything is bad. The water is even bad. I never drank water the whole while I lived in St. James. But right now, the problem is all of these tanks, all of the fumes that we're smelling, okay? I can't deal with that anymore because I know how sick I've been. I've been sick for too long. So I know I'm going if I got to just go. If they don't buy me out, I just got to get out.
Hopefully you all can still hear me. I'm gonna get back into my presentation. I'm almost done. Alrighty, so as you guys saw, that was a video, very, very poignant clip from Forensic Architecture. The video, I encourage you all to watch in its totality. It's about 30 minutes on YouTube. This is the name, so please get into that when you have a little time. So yes, around this time last year, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Justice Department ended their investigation into the Louisiana government over the heavily industrialized, majority Black Louisiana communities dubbed Cancer Alley and Death Alley. The Louisiana Attorney General, Jeff Landry, filed a suit against the agency claiming it lost, this is a direct quote, claiming it lost sight of the agency's actual environmental mission and instead decided to moonlight as social justice warriors fixated on race when it launched the probe. There's also an article by Jennifer Jazzy, of course, of Law 360 that goes, I am so sorry, that it's Bloomberg Law that goes into further detail about this issue. The investigation would have sparked reparations for tens of thousands of majority Black people living in the parishes along the polluted river area, which is popular amongst these petrochemical industry developers. And they're all, a lot of them are experiencing adverse health effects like cancer and shortened life expectancies. Though I don't have any data on the residents of Death Alley specifically, I'd like to wrap this up with just a few charts on just the health impacts of people based on demographics. And from there, I mean, you can make your own interpretation. These are current asthma rates. And we have, of course, not of course, it shouldn't be like that, but we have unsurprisingly Black and American Indian, Alaskan Native people with the highest amount of asthma. Also, yeah, judging by the population of Hispanic people compared to white people, that's still pretty high, in my opinion. We also, oh, and I have the references of where I'm getting these charts from in case you want to look into this yourself. This is the American Lung Association. So we also have life expectancies at birth, also by race. Here, also have the reference. This is the National Center for Health Statistics. And also new cancers by race and ethnicity. And also judging by population, I don't know if this is, although white and Black is neck and neck, I'm just thinking that's still not very fair. Well, I guess you can't make health impacts fair, but it just doesn't seem like it's weighed equally based on the population of the country. Yes, it's just about done, this presentation. I just want to share a few closing thoughts and get the questions answered. And just once again, stress the mission that I want to spark conversations here. I also allow corrections. Please do correct me in the chat because yeah, I'm more of a written communicator, so verbalizing stuff, sometimes I get lost in there, so please feel free. And also share your ideas for action. And also reach out to some reporters, reach out to your local governments, reach out to people, see what you can do to get involved in this ever rising issue. I just want to share just a few things just to remain optimistic about in this fight for people like me and so many others, which is the executive order by Biden. It sounds like it could stand to do a lot for environmental justice if implemented correctly. And also my professor here at VLGS noted, Professor Rosenblum, that zoning is being explored as a means of reversing hazardous waste placements and rezoning to prohibit toxic uses. But it's still not much being done for reparation for the people that are already impacted. Their health is already declining. And I just want to thank a few people. I want to thank Professor Rosenblum and my entire class here at Vermont Law. He's usually at Albany Law, but he's here this summer, and he taught the land use and racial justice class. I guess I can come out of sharing right now. So yes, he taught the land use and racial justice class. Also want to thank Professor Diane, and I'm going to say her last name wrong, but Shank, C-S-A-N-K, for just spending time with me, learning, teaching me a little bit of her ways as a lawyer, as being more fluent in verbally speaking and getting my point across to an audience. So thank you so much. I want to thank Jennifer Hajazi. I want to thank the whole team at Bloomberg Law, especially my editing team, Zach Sherwood, and Maya Earls, who is also alum of the Media Fellowship here at Vermont Law. And of course, my mother for keeping me optimistic during this very, very emotional topic and presentation.
Thank you, Giovanna. That was extremely powerful. And thank you as well for participating in the fellowship this summer. I know that we got some comments in the chat from the class that you've participated in, and they offer the first comment was, whoa, we love you. So that's a good start. That was a good start.
Yes.
That's a good piece of feedback. Wanted to share that. I think there's a number of other interesting comments and questions in the chat that we can talk through a little bit in our remaining few minutes. One was, you shared the quote from the Euclid case, and there was this discussion of the children needing the wide open spaces, and the question was sort of, do you see that as the weaponization of children for sort of the racist ends in that? There is a history of that in our country, where the white children and their needs become a talking point. I wonder if you have any reflections on that.
Yes, I have a lot to say about that. Just because how can you separate a child based on race? Isn't a child just a child? I feel like at a fundamental level, as a human being, adult, how can you do that? What makes one child over another child? And I guess that is racism at its core. If you are able to look at a child and say, oh, this child is more deserving of a better life and better opportunity based on racial factors.
Another question came up. I think you raised this idea that there is this sort of backlash, and you brought up the Louisiana case against the EPA. One question was, you had the quote about zoning from Senator Hott back in the early part of the 20th century. Wondering if you have any reflections on the current political leaders and how are there any that remind you of that sentiment? And obviously it's a very contested issue, and you've laid out very well the case that there's this ongoing racism at the core of some of this backlash, as well as the underlying, and another comment was about the redlining that is undergirding all of these land use decisions. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that current leadership.
Yes. It just, on a personal level, it saddens me that people in these positions of power can blatantly, throughout history, have these perspectives on race and just make them so vocal and so publicized to the point where the public, if you lack a mind of your own, just kind of follow suit. And instead of realizing just the basis of being a human being besides race. So yeah, it just saddens me that these people keep getting a platform to say blatantly just wrong things. But on this other side of it, this idea of facially neutral language, not saying something but meaning it in a way, it makes me also very nervous and a little more frightened, because I mean, I'd rather someone be straight up and blatant about what they feel. I just don't like that they're in a position of power to do it and vocalize it publicly to such a broad audience. But to be able to hide it within language is also very frightening. So yeah, I hope that answered the question. And also, I just wanted to bring up the idea of reverse redlining. I just learned about that, which is using predatory loans to take homes, which is a lot more recently occurring today.
So we're running short on time, Giovanna. There were some other good comments in the chat that I wanted to just mention and encourage people to think about. One is that there is, you talked a bit about the Biden administration's efforts, and there's some, there's certainly some efforts around investment in disadvantaged communities through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Justice 40 initiative that was more executive branch in nature. There are definitely some things for folks to pay attention to and look into there. That was a comment. And then I think the other, maybe to leave it, a comment from one of your classmates was, just requesting people to reflect on their own experience in the regions where they live and where the industrial and more polluting land uses are. And to really reflect on that. I think we see that pattern repeated across the country, for sure, as you've laid out so eloquently. So do you have any final thoughts for the audience as we wrap up? And I'll close this out after you're done.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody who's attended and who will watch in the future. I just really, truly hope and pray that this does what it is meant to do. I hope this sparks conversation. I hope this gets people acting to do more, especially amongst a group of such justice-focused and humanitarian focused lawyers here at Vermont Law School. So that's all I really hope for this.
Well, thank you, Giovanna, very much for what was a really powerful summation and presentation, and really covered the lay of the land very, very well on this topic. I'll note just briefly that the Vermont Law and Graduate School curriculum includes quite a emphasis on environmental justice, alongside our experiential offerings in the Environmental Justice Clinic, and we've tried to make that a focus in a lot of our efforts. And so, certainly curricularly across the country, we're environmental law programs are working on this question of really making environmental justice more central to the curriculum and to what we consider part of environmental law. And so we very much appreciate your participation.
That makes me so optimistic to hear, and I'm rooting for you all.
It's so important, and thank you so much for bringing it to us today. Thanks to all the viewers out there, those participated in the chat. Wonderful participation. Our next talk in this series will take place online Tuesday of next week. at the same time and the same place. So have a wonderful day, everyone, and a great weekend.
Yes.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Javon.